She has a master's in public administration from the Columbia University and is a Fulbright scholar. She's also an ex-lawyer and co-founded a tech company and is now the executive director of the Association of Women for Action and Research, AWARE. She's Corinna Lim. Welcome, Corinna.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining us. Okay, so I'll just get started right into it. When was the first time that you realized there's a strong need for an organization like AWARE in Singapore?
Oh, okay. So I actually had not been at all involved in the women's movement, and I was a lawyer, not a very happy lawyer, but trying to sort of make meaning of the fact that I was a lawyer and to be a little bit happier in Singapore. So this is probably early 90s. So I started to do pro bono legal clinics, and I started at Queenstown Community Center with the Singapore Association of Women Lawyers, which was the first time that I was now exposed to lots of women coming in to see me about their difficult family situations. Some of it involved abuse and violence. Some of it just involved, bad relationships or spouses that were not very responsible. So in relation to family violence in particular, the law then was actually very inadequate. So for example, in a scene of family violence, you call the police come, they will check at that time whether you have broken bones, a eye, limb, ear hanging out, and if you didn't, they would walk out so long as the fighting had stopped, because they couldn't arrest anyone, right? You needed to satisfy the test of grievous hurt, which meant broken bones. So cuts and wounds, bruises that didn't amount to broken bones actually didn't make that cut. So I guess that was when, it's like there's something very wrong with this law, that people cannot get the protection that they need. Then I joined AWARE, and AWARE at that time started a legal clinic as well. So the first thing I did was to join that, and then come out to join in 1994-95. And I joined in 92. So Kamal joined 94, 95 was the first batch of nominated MPs. And she said, let's see whether we can do something about the family violence law. And she said, can you draft the family violence bill? I'm like, I've never drafted a bill before in my life, and it's not the kind of thing that private lawyers do. It's done by government lawyers. But anyway, so a team of 3 of us did it, and we're like, wow. It was thrown out, but it actually had the impact of changing the Women's Charter and having the PPO, the Personal Protection Order regime, become much stronger, right, and effective finally. And then the government also started to have these networks of family service centers. And so now there was real protection against family violence. And I think at that point was when I realized, gosh, this advocacy, the research that had been done 10 years ago, for the last 10 years, the campaigning actually could make a huge difference.
What were the other, successes in AWARE that has, that we've seen such a resounding victory?
Right. Okay. So firstly, all these things take a long time, right? So family violence, 1985 to 1995 was the period of research, campaigning, advocacy, taking calls from the helpline, right? And so one thing you do need is data. You definitely need data. The helpline, which we started in 1992, 91, 92, started to give us some of that data. Now I can say anecdotally, this was already happening when I had started doing my counseling in Queenstown. But I couldn't prove it, right? You actually need that data. So whatever you do, you need data. You need a long time to persuade people. Sometimes you get lucky, right? I think the shortest advocacy that I've done is the change at the Evidence Act, Section 157D, which was about whether a woman's sexual history could be brought up in a case where she was the victim giving evidence. And that one didn't require like a mass public campaign, but Minister Shanmugam was the minister then. They were changing the Evidence Act. We were opportunistic. We realized this is a really bad provision. We went to see him, and he agreed. Right. So sometimes it's short. So that was another change where now you couldn't just bring up a woman's sexual history. You had to show that it was relevant. And but I suppose the Protection from Harassment Act was the other big area, you know, where we could see a very positive change, right? And that was 2005 to 2014 was the period. So for everything, right, there is a cycle. It takes a little bit of time to socialize the idea. Things might become dormant for a while, and then suddenly you find like, oh, you know, this has become of interest, and you've done all that work already. You have to be also opportunistic, right? So there are a couple of lessons that we have learned along the way as to how to make these large-scale changes, but it takes time.
So what are the failures then? What were the areas that you felt like there was just no opportunity, or maybe there was an opportunity but something else didn't happen?
I don't really think of anything as a failure, actually. It just, for me, is a matter of time. And I feel like we are on the right side of time. So as you can see, the society is becoming less conservative, right? And so, you know, I always remind myself this, the arc of justice is long, but it's in the right direction. But there was, I think it was 2009 or so, can't remember exactly, there was a penal code change. And, you know, it was like another one of these sort of major revamps. And we had two major asks. One was 377A, the other was marital rape, right? We said, you know, get rid of both. And we thought that there was a good chance, you know, of actually seeing some action. And that was the time I think that Siew Kam Hong also was doing his advocacy in Parliament. So that didn't happen, still hasn't happened. You know, between activists, no one believes it's going to happen in the next 10 years, or very few people do. I do, you know, I actually think, but I am generally quite optimistic. And I think it's actually important to be hopeful and optimistic as an activist. If you are not born that way, or if you can't, you know, if you don't have that attitude, you could get really very, very disillusioned or disappointed. But if you just see it as you just have to keep knocking away, chipping away, and at some point you will see a change in attitude, and suddenly something catches on, and it may be something in the world. If we talk about harassment, you know, at the time that we were advocating for protection, there was not a lot happening in the world, and then suddenly #MeToo happened in 2017. So the law was in place. You know, you didn't see a lot of people coming in, but suddenly in 2017, when #MeToo happened, I remember the sexual assault care center cases went up by 70%, 79%.
Feminism, that's something that, you know, AWARE stands for, but it's still like a dirty word to most people because they say that it excludes males and whatnot. So we understand that feminism is about gender equality. What do you think is the man's role towards gender equality?
Okay, so firstly, I think it's less of a dirty word now, and you know, maybe we unpack it a little bit or explain it a little bit. What is feminism, right? And I have a three-part test. You know, are you a feminist or not? So one is, do you believe in gender equality, right? If you say yes, then the second test is, do you think we have reached gender equality? Have we achieved gender equality, say in Singapore? And if you think the answer is no, then we can go to the third level test, right? Which is, if it hasn't been achieved in Singapore, do you want to be a part of that campaign, of that fight, of that movement to try to achieve it, right? So actually a lot of people can say, yeah, you know, yes to all these things. But yet there is this negative sort of idea, which is this thing about men, right? So I think it's you're right that we have to talk about where men stand in this. And increasingly, men are very interested in this cause. So let me just give a very recent example. 2 days ago, we posted our new event, which is I think on the 29th. I think it's on the 29th or the 21st of this month. And it's about toxic masculinity. In 8 hours, it was 103 persons signed up. That is usually our full house for other events, right? But it was huge. And I knew it would be huge because I've been seeing this trend of men being very interested because gender equality, sexism hurts them too. You know, it hurts the relationships that they have with their partners because they are supposed to be a certain way.
So do you actually include a lot of men in your staff and your board? Because I noticed that there's really only one guy in the staff and the board's made up by all women. So
yeah, we would love to have more men on the staff. I mean, I think the only part that we had some reservations, and even then, you know, I have overcome those reservations, is whether the sensitive areas of work, sexual assault, for example, right? Would it be okay to have a male case manager, right? That's the only sort of area that there's some concern about. And, you know, but we actually have spoken to, or I have spoken to male sexual assault case managers from the US, and they gave me a very different perspective. And of course, it has to be the right kind of guy and really empathetic, right? Because actually, if it's a guy speaking to a woman, and he is a very, very empathetic person who understands trauma and gender, it can actually give the survivor some confidence of in men again, right? Because something bad was done to you by a man, but then now you come across a man who's the opposite, right? So it can also work. But anyway, we would love to have more male staff, but a lot of people who are applied to where are women. It's not surprising. It's gender equality and women's rights, right? Women's rights aren't exactly equal yet. So we are fighting on the women's rights side of gender equality, and I think that's why we attract more females. The board is a different matter. There's actually the current rule is that it's going to be an all women board, and we don't have men as a matter of the constitution on the board, right?
is there a reason for that?
Yeah, the reason for that is if we did try a few years ago, we put it to the members, should we have men on the board? And you know, maybe because we see that it's important to have the perspectives, right? We also see that we need to keep the space such that women's voices will not be silenced, where you know a lot of it is silenced in the rest of society to some extent. You want to have a space where you know women can say these things that it's hard to say outside or with men around. So we thought, you know, maybe cap the number of men on the board. So we actually did have a proposal, yes, but it didn't happen, right? The membership decided it's not yet time. I think that this is again a question of time. The vote was very close, right? And that was in 2017, right? If we do it now, I think it might be different because I think society has changed quite a lot. Really looking at the sign-ups for this recent event, yeah.
So actually, I also want to talk about another issue about women's rights and feminism, which is intersectionality, right? I think for people who are not familiar with this, it's the one person describes it as a prism for seeing the way in which various forms of inequality often operate together and exacerbate each other. So a poor woman going through domestic violence and somebody who is, you know, from a richer background going through domestic violence, they're very different modes of recourse. They're very different ways of approaching it. I want to talk a little bit more about, you know, the racial differences for women in Singapore, because I have a lot of friends who come from racial minorities who are women, and they find that it is actually a very different lived experience in Singapore. For example, the Muslim law, which is something that you guys have talked about in your 2017 report. So I want to know a little bit more about your progress in this area.
Yeah, sensitive issue. Thanks for asking. um, so I, so we are actually really concerned, and I think about 5 years ago we said we want to build a inclusive women's movement, an inclusive movement, right? Um, and that we wanted to engage more with issues of class and race and religion. So we actually did have a project called the Power Fund. And, the Power Fund was about empowering, working with small groups, niche areas, say Muslim women's rights in different aspects. Uh, there was a transgender group under this. There were young feminist groups, so different types of groups, and we gave them some significant amount of funds for small, for a small group, and also our technical mentoring advice, technical advice and mentoring, right? There were 4 or 5 of these Muslim groups, and so that we were their big sister, but we didn't want to be the ones being the voice, because it is their issues. It's better that we actually work with them to empower them to actually to do the advocacy. So that has been our main approach, which is to work with the groups.
So with that, the last question that I have is, what is one achievable target for Singapore within the area of women's rights and gender equality? What's one achievable target you think we can really aspire towards in the next 5 years? So that means when the next GE is called, we can look at this as like a benchmark or a scorecard, so to speak.
Well, we have a lot of little things. I mean, not little, but they're like, whether it's housing for single parents, and I think a lot of those policy tweaks that we would like to see, many of those things, right? More housing for single parents, for unwed mothers. Maybe that one can, so like quite specific ones on a broad level. I would love to see the constitution, right, being changed to say that there should be no discrimination on the basis of gender. Now, it may not have a strong practical impact, because no one's going to use the Constitution, I think, to bring a lawsuit, but it sends a really strong signal. And on top of that, maybe an Anti-Discrimination Act, right? And again, a lot of this is signaling there is discrimination on many different grounds. Gender, sexuality, religion, race, age, everything, right? And I think we need stronger policies and laws on this. Yeah.
Okay, I see. Thank you so much. And with that, that's the end. Thank you for joining us.
Not at all. My pleasure. Thank you.